Okay, so in this video, we're going to work with DatePickers and the local date data type, and we're going to use it to so you can select the date and display the value of the date from the date picker, reset the date so it's blank again or null, set it to today's date, so we can set it to today's date in the date picker, set it to a default date that you might have if you need to set it to a default date. Okay, so I've set it to the 1st of August there, today's the 28th of August. And I'll also show you how to compare dates as well. So here we've got first dates greater than the second. If I set the second to tomorrow, 29th, I can compare dates, and now first date's less than the second. If I set it to today, first date's equal to the second. Okay, so that's all we're doing in this video, is working with date pickers and a local date data class in or class in Java. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Hope it's useful. Okay, so let's get started with a basic JavaFXML project. So we've got a new project, JavaFXML application. Click next. I'm just going to call mine date pickers and local dates. Okay, so date pickers and local dates. Go finish. Okay, so here's our source tree. Let's open up and get to the FXML and double click on that to open it up in SceneBuilder. Okay, there it is in SceneBuilder. And I'll just expand this a bit so I can have more room to work. Okay, so by default with SceneBuilder we get a button and a label. So we'll just move those up to the corner there. And we might still use them. We'll move up to the corner. Okay, and now we're ready to start. Okay, so let's add a button to our application, and we'll also add a date picker, and we'll add another label. Okay, so we can show, when the user clicks the button, we can show what the date is they selected. Okay, so we just added those three components there. We need to access all three from our code, so we need to give them all the names in our code section here. And I'll give the button or the date picker 1. I'll call it date picker 1. I'll give the button a label of what do you want to call it? Select date or something. Select date button, whatever you want to call it, button. And I'll give it that name in the FXID, and I'll give it the name of handler, so we can have a method to deal with the clicks. And the label, we'll just call it output label. Okay, and I'll resize. Okay, so now when we click the button, what we want to do is display the date in our label. So let's go ahead and do that. So Control S that and back to NetBeans, and we'll right click on the FXML and generate our controller again. So make controller. Okay, so there's our label, our button. That's the click me button that was there by default. There's our select date button, our date picker, and our output label. They're the three we care about for this work. The others were just there by default. Okay, so when we click the date, when we click the select date button, we want to display the value of the date picker in the label. Okay, so select date button, date picker 1. So to get the value of the date picker, you get the value of let's get value. That's how you get the date out of a date picker. Okay, and that comes out as a local date object. Local date, local date 1 equals date picker 1.getValue. So that gets you the value out of the local out of date picker 1 as a local date object. We need an import for that, so we'll go over here and go import java time.localDate. That brings the import in for our local date class. Okay, so now that we've got the local date, we can now use the label to display it. So our output label is what we want to set. So output label.set text selected, and then the value of the date plus local date 1. Okay, so we're setting the text of the label to use selected, and then the value of the local date 1 that was the value of the date picker 1. So Control S to save, and let's run that. Okay, so let's select the date with nothing selected here, and you'll say you selected null. So when you haven't selected any date in date picker and you want to get the value of it, it returns the value null, the null memory address. Okay, let's go ahead and select the date, and I'll select the 28th of August, and I'll go select date, and it's got you select the 28th of August. and it's by default local dates are displayed in year, month, and then day order. But of course, you can format them to whatever format you like. Okay, that's just the default format if you don't specify a format. Okay, let's add a reset date on here so we can reset this to not selected or null. So we'll add another button back into our scene builder. We'll add a new button called reset date. So we're going to set the date back to being not selected or blank or null. Okay, so with the reset date button, we'll give it a name of reset date button. Okay, Control C, and I'll paste that in here and go handler, so that everything's all set up for our code. Okay, Control S to save. Back to NetBeans. Right click on the FXML and say make controller to bring everything down, all the latest components down. And there's our reset date button, and our handler should be down here. There's our handler. Okay. So when the user clicks the reset date button, we want to set the date back to how it appeared originally. In other words, nothing filled in. Let's just refresh our memory what that looks like. So there's no date selected there by default. Okay. When we choose one, we've got a date there, but how do we get back to what it was originally? That's what we're doing now. We're resetting the date back to nothing or null. Okay. So our date picker is called DatePicker1. And we want to set the value of that, set value to null. Okay, so in other words, we're setting it to no date selected, blank, nothing. Okay, so we can do that now. So we can select the date and go select date, and we selected the 21st of August. Reset the date, sets it back to nothing. And if we go select date again, we've got null. So it's back to what it was originally. Remember when we clicked select date, without having picked a date, it would say null. So we're back to that again, which is all fine. That's what we want. Okay. What if we want to set the date to a certain date? For example, we want to set this date to a certain date by default when we load the application or when we load the scene. We can do that as well. Okay. So if we want things to happen automatically whenever the scene loads, we're really talking about the initialize method. Okay. So if we want to set date picker 1 to a particular date, we can do that. So let's create a date. We'll call it local date. And how do you create local dates? You don't go equals new local date. That's not how you work with local dates. Okay, so let's have a look at the Java help for local dates. Okay, and you'll see there's methods here like local date dot now. There's dot now. So you can say, give me the local date for the date and time it is now. And also you can use this of method. Let's use both of those. Okay, so we'll create a button called move those up a bit, and we'll add some more buttons. So we'll add a button for today, and another button that's going to say for default. Okay, so we'll have a button that says default as well. You can make those all the same if you want to, but it's only a throwaway up, it doesn't matter. Okay, so when we click the today button, we want to set the date that's in here to today. When we click the default button, we want to set the default date to a particular date that we've got in mind that we want for a default date. It might be a special date, it might be the end of the next quarter, or the start of the quarter, or the start of the financial year. Whatever the date is, we'll set it. Okay, so we'll give these two buttons some names. So this is today button, and we want a handler, today button handler, and we've got a default date, default button, and I'll make the handler default button handler. Okay, Control S to save. Let's go back to our code in NetBeans, and we'll go right click on the FXML and say make controller, and that brings down the latest code. And there's the today button and the default button. Okay, so let's say we want to let's take this one out for now. We'll make it so the default button sets a default date. We'll do that for a start. And today button sets today's date. Okay, so let's create a date object, local date object for today. Local date, uppercase date, today equals local date dot now. Okay, so there's no new operator there. You don't say equals new. That's not how local dates work. Okay, so now we've got today's date. Let's set the local date in the date picker to be that. So it's date picker 1 dot set value to today. Okay, and of course you could do all that in one line of code if you wanted to. For example, like this, and I could comment out those two dates and go localdate.now, and that would be just the same. Okay, so you can, I'll put it in 2 lines of code here, but you can do it all in one if you want to. Not much different. Okay, that takes care of today's date. Let's have a default date as well. So we'll do that, grab that code again. So remember the off method? That took a year and a month and a day. Dot off takes a year and a month and a day in that order. So we're constructing a new local date. So we're going to say local date default date equals local date dot off. And remember, we're going to pass in a year. So 2021. I want to pass in the month, which is going to be August. And I want to pass in the first of the month. So we're the 28th today of August. I want to make it to the 1st of August. The first of the month is the local date that we want to have for the default date for some reason. Okay, and $2021. Okay, so just make that a 1, that's fine, and 8. Okay, if you put the O's in front, it means something else, so just leave the bare numbers. Now, if we're reading dates in from file, okay, we're reading dates in from file, we could have stored the dates in the file as years and months and days as the numbers, and then when we need to construct a local date object again, when we read the file, we could bring those numbers in and then use those numbers to construct a new local date this way as well. Okay, so keep this in mind when you're using file IO, and you need to save dates to file and read dates back in again. So when you're saving dates to file, you could say .get month, get year, and get day of month. Okay, so get day of month, and get year. Save those 3 values out for each local date and read them back in that way as well. That's a hint for when you're doing some file IO a bit later. Okay, back here. So we've constructed a local date now. Now I just want to set the date picker to have that value. And it's date value. And again, we could combine those 2 lines of code into one if we wanted to, just like we did here. Okay, so Control S to save. Let's run it. So now when we click today, we should see today's date appear here. Okay, 28th of August. When I click the default date, I should see the 1st of August appear. There it is, 1st of August. When I click select date, I should see the date being displayed in the label. You selected 1st of August. And when I reset the date, it goes back to blank. Okay, that's some pretty basic stuff to do with date pickers and local dates. They're pretty easy to work with, but you've got to deal with local dates as well. Okay, so for date picker, you need get value, set value, and then for local dates in the Java help, there's a whole bunch of useful stuff here. You can compare dates, equals, compare to. For formatting, you can format them so they're day of the week, comma, the day of the month name, year, and all that sort of stuff. So you can format them just how you like as well with this format command. And there's a whole lot of stuff in there that you might use. So let's get another date picker on the screen, and we'll get the values out of those date pickers and compare them. Are they the same date? Are they different dates? Is one less than the other? Is one greater than the other? So let's do that. So we'll add another date picker, and I'll call that date picker 2. Okay, so we've got date picker 1 over here and date picker 2 over here. And we'll add a button, and I'll call this button here compare dates. And we'll add another label that's going to show whether the dates are the same or less than or greater than. Okay, so we've got first date and second date, and this button will compare them, and then we'll display the results in this label. Okay, so let's give all these some names. So we've got date picker 2, that's fine. This is a compare dates button, compare dates button. Control C, Control V, and I'll call that handler. So for the handler, uppercase H. So I'll keep everything consistent, and I'll call this label here compare label. It's where the comparison result's going to go. Okay, so I'm giving everything names so I can reference it from our code. Control S to save. Back to NetBeans. Right click on the FXML. Make controller to bring it all across. Okay, and now we've got this sort of stuff here going on. So we've got the compare button and the compare label. Okay, compare label. So that's what we want to set down here. So I'll just bring that down so I don't have to think about what it is and try and create it again. I'll get this code here. Okay, so we've got local date 1 is date picker 1 get value. Local date 2 is date picker 2 dot get value. So date picker 2 dot get value is local date 2. And then we can use that compare to method in the Java help here. Compare to. And where'd it go? Compare to, there it is. So this is used to compare dates. It's just the same as when you compare strings. If you say string 1 dot compare to string 2, Java returns less than 0 if string 1's less than string 1, equal to 0 if string 1's equal to string 2, and greater than 0 if string 1 is greater than string 2. Same applies to dates, exactly the same. Okay. There's also the equals there if you just want to see if they're equal or not. So equal and compare to. Let's go back to the code. Okay. So let's just make sure they're not null first, because we might not have selected a date in either one. So if local date 1 is equal to null, and it's double equals there because we're using comparison equals, then we can set the label dot set text uppercase T, and we'll say first date is null, and we won't bother checking any further. Okay. Else if date 2 is null, so date 2, then we can say the second date's null. So the dates might be equal, but we're just making sure we're not going to call compare to for a null date. Okay. Okay. And else. So if we're in this part of the code here, we know the dates are not null. So now we can compare them by using compare to, because you can't call compare to on a null date. Okay. You're trying to reference a null memory address, which isn't allowed in Java. Okay, so let's get the compare result. Int result is equal to local date 1 dot compare to local date 2. So we're doing a comparison. Int result equals local date 1 dot compare to local date 2, and then we just see whether that's less than 0 or equal to 0 or greater than 0 to see how the comparison went. So if result is less than 0, then first date is less than second date. So we'll say that in the label. First date is less than second date. Okay, else if result is greater than 0, then first date is greater than second date. First. Okay, first date's less than second date if it's less than 0. First date's greater than second date if it's greater than 0. And the only other option left is if they're equal to 0, if the result's equal to 0. Okay, and that's the only other option left. So we don't have to do else if here, just else is enough. Because if it's less than 0 or greater than 0, that's all the possibilities apart from equal to 0. So we have to say else if it's equal to 0. And here, the first date is equal to the second date. Okay, so we get the result of comparing the dates, and then if it's less than 0, first date's less than a second, because we go local date 1 compare to local date 2, first date, second date. If it's greater than 0, first date's greater than second date. If it's equal to 0, first date is equal to second date. Okay, so we check the dates and set the label accordingly, depending whether the dates are null or how the dates compare. Control S, and let's run again. Okay, so I want to compare dates, and first date's null, so let's set it to today, and compare dates, and second date's null, so we can't go any further. Let's select the date here, and I'll select the 1st of September, and I'll compare dates, and first date is less than second date. Let's go to the 28th, which is 28th of August, which is Saturday, and I'll compare dates, and it should say they're the same. First date equals second date, that's correct. And let's go to yesterday, and I'll compare dates, and we've got first date is greater than second date. So the comparison's working great. Okay. So that's basically all you need to do to work with date picker and local dates. So date picker, you need two methods. You've got set value and get value. And date and local dates, you've got a whole bunch of stuff that you can use. And I recommend you look in the Java help there. So there's compare to and equals, very useful. Format for formatting dates. And also you can get the month and the year and the day of the month. So 3 useful methods there for getting the values out of a local date. And also you can construct local dates to be for today's date, or using the of method to construct them from a year and a month and a day. Okay, so pretty easy, but just make sure you get some practice with it, and they'll become second nature in no time. Hope the video is useful. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.